أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وأما الغلام فكان أبواه مؤمنين فخشينا أن يرهقهما طغيانا وكفرا فأردنا أن يبدلهما ربهما خيرا منه زكاة وأقرب رحما رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي فالحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه ومن استنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين اللهم اجعلنا منهم ومن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر آمين يا رب العالمين أما بعد. Once again everybody, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Today my intention is to try to cover probably the most difficult ayat of this entire story. These are ayat number 80 and 81. I ask Allah Azza wa Jal to give me clarity in speech and that I'm able to do some justice to the wisdom captured inside of these ayat, and that Allah Azza wa Jal enhances and matures my iman and yours by way of understanding these ayat of His better. So this is the journey of Musa alayhi salam and Khadir, and now he's explained himself as far as the wrecking or the damaging of the ship. That's now happened. But now we're at the more difficult of the three stops. In fact, of the three things that happened, the most difficult one to understand is the middle one. You would think it would be a progression. By the time you get to the third, you get to some kind of a climactic ending. It's actually, from the point of intensity, it's anticlimactic. The most difficult incident in all three of these is actually this middle incident. And there's a lot of discussion around that, and I'm hoping to kind of encapsulate some of that discussion and inshallah ta'ala benefit myself and all of you with that. So Khadir turns to Musa alayhi salam and says, وَأَمَّا الْغُلَامِ, and as for the boy that he murdered, the boy that he killed in cold blood in front of Musa alayhi salam, and he was in absolute shock. قَتَلْتَ نَفْسًا زَكِيَّةً بِغَيْرِ نَفْسٍ. He says, فَكَانَ أَبَوَاهُ مُؤْمِنَيْنِ. And it so happens that both his parents were believers. Okay, so now we have one bit of information. This child's parents were believers, which means this child, not only all children are on the fitrah anyway, but above and beyond that, this parent's children were believers. And just like in the previous explanation, by the time when you start the explanation, it makes it even harder to understand, not easier. Because when he explained why I damaged the ship, he said, كَانَتْ لِي مَسَاكِينَ يَعْمَلُونَ فِي الْبَحْرِ. It belonged to poor people that worked at the sea. That makes it even worse. That doesn't make it better. And then he kind of solves that mystery as he speaks. So here he's saying, he says, فَكَانَ أَبَوَاهُ مُؤْمِنَيْنِ. Then he uses an interesting word, فَخَشِينَ, which we'll come back to. So I'll first translate the whole thing and then we'll dive in. فَخَشِينَ أَن يُرْهِقَهُمَا طُغْيَانًا وَكُفْرًا. So we were afraid, this is going to be important, the word we were afraid that he is going to overwhelm both of them with rebellion and with disbelief. So I'll repeat that phrase again. That child's parents, both of them were believers, and therefore we were afraid that he was going to overwhelm them, snatch them up with tughyan, which means going in excess, tajawuzul had. So this actually means going, transgressing against them, violating them, abusing them in some way, and then also with disbelief. So he was going to crush them with his disbelief and his rebellion. And he says then, فَأَرَدْنَا أَنْ يُبْدِلَهُمَا رَبُّهُمَا خَيْرًا مِنْهُ زَكَاةً وَأَقْرَبَ رُحْمًا. Thus we intended, again the word we intended that your master replace for both of them. Who's the both of them? The parents. That your master replace for the both of them خَيْرًا مِنْهُ زَكَاةً, someone better than him in terms of being pure and innocent. وَأَقْرَبَ رُحْمًا, and this is going to be a harder thing to discuss, but we'll dig into it. I'll give you a literal translation. Someone purer in terms, or someone better in terms of innocence and purity, and someone closer to mercy and care. Closer in terms of mercy and care. Now that's, again, a bit ambiguous English translation, so we have to unpack that as we discuss today. So, The first thing I want to talk to you about a little bit is the word irada, the word intention. And there's a lot that's been said about this story. There are three incidents. Khidr is going to explain himself. The first incident, just so it's in your, the bullet list is in your minds. The first incident is the ship, the second is the child being killed, and the third is the wall being built, right? When it came to the first incident, when Khidr explained himself, he said, "Aradtu an a'ibaha," I intended to damage it. I intended. So for the ship, what did he say? I intended. I need you to remember that. When it came to this killing of a child, he said, "Aradna an yubdilahuma." We intended. So the I has now moved over to what? We. And then the third incident, what was the third incident? Let's see if you have the bullet point list in your head. What's item number 3? The wall. When he explains the wall, he says, فَأَرَادَ رَبُّكَ. Your master intended. Your Rabb intended. So the intention, the verb for intention is being used 3 times, but 3 different ones are being used. I intended, we intended, and your master intended. That's the sequence of events. There's a lot of discussion around why that happened. And you can boil down what the Mufassirun have discussed about the I intended, we intended, and your master intended into 5 analyses, if you can call it that. The first of them is the most contemporary, that would be from Dr. Fadl Salih Hassan al-Ra'i. I'll share his view with you first. And that is that this might be teaching us the manners we have to have when speaking about Allah. And to explain that to you in simple terms, everything Allah does, everything that happens is by the will of Allah. Everything. Whether you and I think it's a good thing or a bad thing, it happened by the will of Allah. Every single incident, every action, every news, every calamity, every good thing, every bad thing supposedly is actually a result of kun fayakun. That's the reality that a Muslim believes in. But that sounds easy as a thing to say, but if you start analyzing that, then there's a lot of pretty bad things happening in the world. There's a lot of crime happening in the world. There's a lot of evil happening in the world. And for the atheist, this is his number one tool in his arsenal. He says, well, if all this evil is happening, your God's doing it. So God is evil. Easy for them to say, right? Because they attribute all things to Allah. What Allah is teaching us in these ayat is even as something bad is happening, there's something good behind the scenes that may not be immediately visible. It may be part of a large set of domino effects, the good of which may eventually unfold. So it's more complex than our view of good and evil. Our view of good and evil is limited to our own limited understanding, our limited logic, our limited worldview. Allah's perception and Allah's vision of good and evil is far beyond what we can perceive. What we've been given in terms of consciousness, awareness, knowledge, morality is a drop in the ocean. The entire thing that you might call the definition of right and wrong is a much bigger ocean. We only possess a drop of it. The same way my understanding of reality is a drop in the ocean. Reality at large is something much, 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 much bigger. I keep referring to this analogy of drops because this is important in this story. Khidr told Musa alayhi salam from the beginning, what you know is a drop, and what I know is also a drop compared to the knowledge Allah has. Right? So what Musa alayhi salam, with his vast knowledge of morality based on revelation, is actually a drop from what Allah Azza wa Jal knows. And Khidr alayhi salam, acting on what he knows and knowing how he explains himself, even his explanations are just a drop of the actual explanation. There's much more going on than actually what even Khidr alayhi salam is going to explain. It's much richer than that. So that analogy is going to help us, through this entire journey. But anyway, let's get back to point number 1. You see, Muslims understand that there's a way to speak about Allah with respect. A believer will not say, Allah caused my car accident. Allah gave me cancer. Allah caused this child to die. Allah started a war. We're not going to talk like that. We won't talk like that. Even though Khidr may be acting directly in accordance with what Allah told him to do, when it came to the word aib, aib means to damage. It means to, because that's what he did to the ship, right? He damaged it. he found it unthinkable, one analysis is he found it unthinkable to use the word damage and attribute that word to Allah, that Allah intended to damage the ship. Even though the latter explanation shows that it was a good thing, the word damage, he just didn't want to put it next to the name of his Rabb. So what does he say? I intended to damage it. Even though much later on, what's he going to say? وَمَا فَعَلْتُهُ عَنْ أَمْرِي. I didn't do this on my own. Later on, he's actually going to say all of these acts were actually mandated by Allah Himself. But right now, it may not be a matter of describing the reality, it may be a matter of the mannerism with which we speak about Allah. I intended to damage the ship. I wanted to damage the ship. That's one understanding. And then when it comes to the second scene, the second scene is two parts. One part is something terrible, the killing of a child. The other part is the long-term gain, which is the gain, another child is going to be born, which I talked about in this ayah today, right? So there's something really bad and then there's something really good. And he didn't want to attribute all of it to himself. And he didn't want to attribute the bad part of it to Allah. So there's a mixture of both good and bad in what's happening now, in what he's explaining. And aradna got used according to Dr. Samirai. We intended. So he's combining himself with Allah. Now this might create a theological problem for some. How can you say we intended and he includes himself and he includes Allah in that? It seems blasphemous. It's actually not blasphemous. There's plenty of places in the Quran where Allah engages in an act and He combines His creation in that act with Himself. Inna Allaha wa malaikatahu yusallun. Allah and His angels send salawat upon the Nabi. Allah's salah on the Nabi is completely different from the angel salah on the Nabi. But they've been fused together in one verb, yusallun ala Nabi. شهد الله أنه لا إله إلا هو والملائكة وأولو العلم قائما بالقسط. Allah testifies, but actually in that ayah, Allah testifies, the angels testify, the people of knowledge testify. One verb, all of them are the subject. They've been combined in the act with Allah. So there's nothing out of the realm of tawheed or adab with Allah that is violated by him saying aradna here. Of course, he's also acting on behalf of the instruction given by Allah. Now, I told you in the killing of this child, which we'll dive deep into because it's a heavy subject, there's something bad and something good. The bad part is the murder. The good part is a new child will be born. There's a blessing coming. And what happens is, first he says, aradna, we intended. But what's the good part? The good part is that a child will be born. So immediately the language switches over and gives credit to Allah exclusively. Aradna an yubdilahuma rabbuhuma khayran minhu. That your master replace someone better. We intended that your master replace. Strange language. You could say he intended that he replace. Your master intended that he replace. But he starts with a we, and not even all the way through the sentence, he switches over to giving credit only to Allah. By implication, the only thing left for him is the part that you might perceive as a negative, which is obviously the killing of the child. Now in the third case, there's nothing that even looks bad. Something that looks bad on the outside and is good behind the scenes. But the building of a wall doesn't even look bad at face value. It looks like it's a good thing. So there's no reason to give myself any credit for something that's good. I'm going to attribute that entirely to Allah. Arada rabbuka, your master intended. So what that might imply is that when we speak about Allah, and we're talking about Allah Azza wa Jal, and in terms of everything that He does, when negative wording is being used, we should be more cautious when speaking about Allah in that way. And it sounds unnatural, but it's actually extremely natural. We wouldn't use certain words attributing them to our mother, attributing them to our father, attributing them to a teacher you have high respect for, because you're uncomfortable using that word for someone you deeply respect. And the highest form of that should actually belong to Allah, and after that His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it's a matter of mannerism that's being analyzed by Dr. Fadil Salih As-Samirai. The other four I'm going to give you are coming from Imam Alusi's Tafseer Ruh al-Ma'ani. Brilliant work, a recent work, but an absolutely profoundly brilliant work. So the first is that when he damages the ship, it's as if, one way you can look at it is, what was the reason? We already went through the reason. What was the reason he damaged the ship? There's a king seizing ships. Now the king seizing ships, obviously, is not some matter of the unseen. It's not some secret that nobody could know. It's like one of those CNN reports. It's a BBC report. In other words, some people know he's seizing ships, other people don't know he's seizing ships. It's not news of the ghaib, you understand? And it's not news of the future that only Allah can know and give by revelation. So it's also possible that Khadir actually is aware of what the king is doing and these fishermen are not aware. So he takes this action, but he takes this action knowing something that these fishermen don't know. There's no time to explain right now because he's right on their tail, which is captured in the word wara'ahum. Wara'a means yulazimuhum, he's right behind them. Any second now his naval forces are going to show up. So there's no time to explain to them why this is going to happen. And he can't damage it on shore, he has to take it on, out by the water and then damage it immediately. So he does this knowing something, not in the realm of revelation, but actually he just had the report that they didn't have. And that's why it's completely logical for him to say, I intended to damage the ship. I took this initiative. So that's not revealed that was me acting on my own to save these people from trouble that was coming their way. You understand? So that's actually him attributing that to Allah, or to himself. When it came to the second matter, actually, let's take it to the third matter first. The third matter is building a wall. And even though I haven't gotten to the rationale yet, the rationale has to do with much later, many years in the future, children are going to grow up and they're going to be able to retrieve what is underneath this wall. So that is knowledge of the what? Future. Knowledge of the future does not belong to you or me. It belongs to who? Allah Azza wa Jal. This is really important. Knowledge of the future belongs to Allah. That sounds like a simple thing to say, but for a lot of people, it's not that simple. Let me tell you why. Because we have something called projections, election projections, strategic military projections, economic projections. Have you heard of these things? There's entire studies. There are people that specialize that are called futurists. They make projections about what the world will look like, what the modern economy will look like, what technology will look like 50 years from now, 70 years from now, 80 years from now, right? And when they make these projections, a lot of times you could say, okay, you can make projections. Projections are an important part of studying macroeconomics. Projections are an important part of studying marketing. Without projections and analytics and these things, how can we make decisions about it? It's business intelligence. It's a huge industry and it's valid. Much of it is valid. But those projections are never definitive, number one. But number two, even a harder thing, a lot of people make projections about what will happen, and as a result of that, justify their wrongdoing right now. So they'll say, if we go to war in this nation and kill these many people, our projections are this many million people will die, this much infrastructure will be destroyed, this many people will be displaced, this much will the economy be destroyed, these many decades they're not going to be able to recover as a society, or maybe 30, 40, 50 years, but our projections are 100 years from now, things will be pretty good. Therefore it's okay. In the long run, this is a good thing. Really, you have an eye into the future that justified you committing the most heinous of acts in the name of what? The greater good that you have no knowledge of. It's simply a projection, right? Allah Azza wa Jal is not, because these kids that were going to grow up and recover the wall, right? I'm getting ahead of myself because we're not at that ayah, but it's important for this understanding. There's no way a human being can know that they'll even grow up, that they won't die young. There's also no way to know that they will grow up and have the ability to recover what is underneath. There's also no way to know that somebody else might not discover it ahead of time. There are too many unknown factors. The only way you can know for sure that these two young men, these boys, are going to reach an older age where they are themselves capable, the wall will remain intact, and they are going to recover it, that is a lot of guarantees that human beings can't give. That can only have come from where? That can only have come from Allah. Unlike the knowledge of the king that's about to seize ships, which can become public pretty quickly, this is knowledge exclusive to Allah. So in the third story, what do you find? Arada Rabbuka. Your master intended that they should reach old age. So he attributes that entirely to Allah because it's a matter of the future. But that leaves the most complicated part of this story, which is the middle, the killing of the child. And in this killing of the child, there is one part of it that he understood is absolutely, Allah has given him news that this child is going to be trouble. He's going to do something bad as he grows up. We'll dig into his badness a little bit later, right? But he knows that for sure. And putting that to a stop is in his hands. So he can kill this child. He has the ability to kill this child. What he does not have the ability to do is ensure another child is born and raised and is good. That's not in his hands, that's in whose hands? That's in Allah's hands. So part of this, the middle act, part of it is in his hands, part of it is in Allah's hands, so there's a mixture of the two. So if you go back again in the second interpretation, the first act can be exclusively his. The last act is exclusively Allah's. And the middle act is partly his and partly exclusively Allah's. So aradna makes the most sense in the middle. We intended. Another, one of my most beautiful, my personal inclination in understanding these ayat is actually the third position. And actually I think I'm going to mention that third position last because it's so epic. So I'm going to leave that because I want to be climactic unlike the story. Right? So I'll go to number 4 and make that number 3. And that is when you say I damaged it, that's a pretty normal way of speaking. But if somebody says we damaged it, we did it. You know who speaks like that? People that are in, unlike Donald Trump, other presidential administrations, when often they spoke about executive decisions, they didn't say I have signed a bill. You know what they used to say? We've signed a bill. We've passed a law. We've passed a resolution. We've made a decision. The president has made an executive order on his own, but he's not saying I. What's he saying? We. The only time we got an obsession with I was with the last president because he didn't want to attribute any credit even to the rest of his administration or the cabinet or the cabinet or the Senate or the House. Nobody. It's just I. But generally, when a mandate is official, and when a mandate has royal decree or some more serious weight behind it, then even you will not speak as I, you'll say what? We. And it's very natural, actually. Because, for example, when you're talking to somebody in customer service, right? One of the reminders of the adhab of the akhirah is waiting in the customer service line for 45 minutes for whatever, right? And eventually the person that picks up the call is not willing to help you and they say, we have a policy. Or we're not able to help with that. Or we. Like, you and who else, bro? Just press the button, just hit enter. You can do it. No, we have this, because you know what they're doing? They're hiding behind the official rule book as if they're not able to act because they're not acting on their own. There's a larger governmental authority behind them that is speaking. And how do they don't say that, they just use what word cleverly? We, right? So the word we can be used to justify yourself when the justification is greater than yourself. You with me? So when he damages the ship, he said, I damaged it because it's not as serious of a matter. But when he has to explain the killing of a child, this is pretty serious and he needs some official weight behind his explanation. And that official weight behind his explanation it might be captured by the use of the word we. So because it's a more grand event, a more grandiose rationale had to be presented, and therefore the word we got used. In the third case, there's no rationale. You don't have to explain yourself. Allah wanted a wall built. There's no moral dilemma here. So arada rabbuk. So that's another way that these ayat have been looked at. Then of course it's matching the objections. This is the fourth interpretation. They say that these three kinds, I intended, we intended, and your master intended, are matching, they correspond to the way that Musa alayhi salam raised the objection. So in the first case he said, did you damage it so that you could drown those people? لِتُغْرِقَ أَهْلَهَا, so you could drown its people? So Musa alayhi salam has leveled an accusation on the intentions of the act. And he says, no, I intended to do it. I intended to damage it, but I did it for this reason. So it corresponds to his accusation. Musa alayhi salam's second criticism is لَقَدْ جِئْتَ شَيْئًا نُكْرًا, something terribly unheard of, unfamiliar, something completely outrageous. The word nukra was used at the killing of the child. And now because he's used a more magnified criticism, a more magnified response is needed, so aradna. A more magnificent response comes. The third time, Musa alayhi salam barely made a comment. If you wanted, you could have just gotten compensated for it. There's nothing more grand about it, so there's a very normal structure used, your master intended. Okay? But now my favorite one. This is the one I was holding off on. Okay? A good teacher if he has a very complicated lesson to teach, a teacher has to learn to start with the very, very basics, and then build up a little bit of complexity, and then add a little bit more complexity, and then add a little bit more complexity, until the student gets to the point where even the more complicated problem becomes easy to understand. Because teaching is about raising the level of the student progressively. You cannot start, the teacher cannot start from where the teacher knows. The teacher has to start from where the student is comfortable. Not where the teacher is comfortable, where the student is comfortable. Sometimes a student doesn't understand something in my Arabic class, and I have to go 10 lessons back and then start somewhere and say, remember this? Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, that's easy. Okay, then remember this? Oh yeah, I remember that too. And now remember C? Yeah, I remember C. Remember D? Oh, and then I finally get them to G, A, B, C, D, E, F. G was where they were confused. If I start explaining G, they're going to have a problem. But if I review A, B, C, D, E, F, and then I say, and what do you get next? And they'll oh, G, Hanji. Now I get it. In other words, you have to elevate your student to teach harder lessons, right? Now notice what's happening. Everything that he did at the end, what did he say? Who was the decision maker in all of them? It was Allah. وَمَا فَعَلْتُهُ عَنْ أَمْرِي. I didn't do this on my own. But how did he get Musa alayhi salam to understand what's happening progressively? First he said, who did it? I did it. Then he said what? We did it. And we is giving Musa alayhi salam a sense there's someone more than just you at play here. Maybe there's a meeting of angels or other ibad of Allah that were discussing this issue, and there's a we it doesn't necessarily have to include Allah, but there's more than you at play here. And I'm getting a hint that there's a larger intent at play. I'm just thinking about you, but there's a bigger picture. And then the final reveal behind all the intentions is the final intent of who? Allah. And so at the end, arada rabbuk. Right? So what this is also teaching us is introducing certain lessons to a believer. Even to a believer, you have to gradually get them to a place where they can understand. You have to get them to understand Allah in a certain way, little by little by little, before you can discuss more complex things. You don't start with the intricacies of aqeedah that are going to confuse somebody on day one. Let me correct your aqeedah by giving you the biggest kalam complexities that have existed in our history. That's an unfair thing to do. And we're learning from this that even if this is true in the most fundamental matters of faith, just as a teacher, you're supposed to do this. You're supposed to start at the basics, start where things are very easy to understand, and then gradually increase in complexity, right? And so walking him through, and it's a really beautiful teaching method that was employed by Khidr alayhi salam in the way that he spoke about these three incidents. But now, let's get to the child. Why is this subject so difficult? I want you to understand something from the point of view of empathy. Empathy means you can feel what somebody else feels. You can try to put yourself in their shoes. That's when you try to have empathy. Let's put ourselves, even though it's really hard, put yourselves in the shoes of those parents who lost this boy. Losing a child because the child had a terminal disease is disastrous. Losing a child because they died in a car accident is extremely painful. But at the end of the day, all of it, you'll question, why did this happen? Well, why my baby? But at the end of the day, your faith will overcome, and you'll say, this was the qadr of Allah. Allah Azza wa Jal decides, this was His time, etc., etc. But you know what's hardest to process? Losing to a disease, maybe as difficult as it is, by comparison easier. Losing in an accident, by an earthquake, by a flood, by a plane crash, by something else easier. Compared to what? Knowing that your child was brutally murdered at the hands of another. Right? It's an unthinkable kind of thing to process. In the other ones, you can attribute them entirely to Allah too, and live with it. You might be able to live with that. But when you know that your child was hurt and killed by another human being, then that is very hard to process. It's much harder than any other scenario. So you understand that as much as we love our children, losing a child, the way we lose our child has an impact on how traumatized we're going to be. And I can't imagine a more traumatic bit of news at how one would lose their child. An innocent child being murdered for no apparent reason. Right? That would be the most, hard to understand, hard to wrap your head around kind of thing. So what Allah has described here is one of the worst experiences a human being or two human beings, a mother and a father, could possibly have in their life. That's what He's described. And in the rationale, what's even more wild is that He's saying all of this was done not to them, all of this was done for them. All of this was done for them. Before I go on, add another bit of complexity to this. Those guys whose ship got damaged, minutes later, hours later, they realized that was a good thing. When the naval inspectors come by and let their ship go, that was, and thank God it got damaged. I was thinking it was a bad thing. Alhamdulillah, we almost sank. So they get it. Compare that to these parents. The parents who lost their child to a murderer. That's how they see it. If you saw it at the edge of if you were sitting on a cliff and you were watching this scene, you would think a murder happened. You wouldn't think this must be some hikmah, arada rabbuka an yablugha ashuddahuma wa yastakhrij, or any of, even this one, an yubdilahuma khayran minhu zakatan wa aqraba ruhma. You're not going to think like that. You're going to think a heinous act just occurred. A gruesome murder occurred. That's how you will think about it. They'll think about it this way. And by the way, is it hours later they'll realize, that was actually a good thing, I get it now? No. They're not going to see it that way. In fact, Allah told us they will have another child, right? Even when they have a child, will they lose the memory of this child? No. Even when that child grows up to be good, are the parents going to think, well, he was probably going to grow up to be a disaster, so this was a good thing? Is that how they're going to think? No. And if somebody else came to them and said, by the way, Allah's plan probably was that your son was going to be a serial killer and that's why He had him killed at the beach. You should thank Allah that He did that for you. And Allah has given you a much better replacement. You should be happy. If somebody talked to you like that at the loss of your child, they would be the next one to get killed. You understand? That's not alhamdulillah, jazakallah khairan for that. I never saw it this way. You just increased my iman. No, you didn't. You didn't increase my iman. What an obnoxious thing to say. We cannot accept that from another human being. You know why? Because human beings don't own the future and they don't know the unseen and they have no right to say this would have happened, that would have happened, that would have happened. Your kid would have been in misery. He was baby Hitler or whatever. You don't get to say that. You don't get to say that. We don't have the pay grade to say that, right? So from their point of view, because this is about empathy now. From their point of view, what's happened is the worst possible thing that could ever happen. And human beings and their relationship with Allah is actually one of the things that gets between a believer and their faith in Allah is the harder a trial gets. The harder a trial gets, the faith can start getting shaken. Faith can start getting shaken. In fact, sometimes even a messenger is saying Allah's help is coming, and the believers are saying when things get too intense, Mata Nasrullah, when is the help of Allah coming? Mata Nasrullah. When trials get too intense, even Umar bin al-Khattab radiallahu anhu can ask the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Alasna ala al-haq? Aren't we the people that have the truth? Aren't we the people following the true religion? Why are we negotiating with these kuffar in Hudaybiyah? When trials get difficult, your faith can get shaken. It can get shaken. And here Allah is saying that these two parents of His were believers. They were believers. And yet they were put through this insanely horrible trial that they know of their child being murdered. And so we have to bear this in mind as we try to process what's happening in this ayah. It's loaded. It's not an easy thing. The ship is way easier to talk about, guys. The wall is way easier it's just pieces of wood. And nobody got killed. And that's just bricks put together. It's not a moral crisis. But this is the taking of a life and the damaging of parents, scarring of parents. The destruction, it looks like the destruction of a family. It's got so many layers to it that we have to unpack. So that's what I wanted you to make you aware of first and foremost. Now, what did we learn from these ayat? The next part that's going to be hard as I lay this out to you is fakhashina. So we were afraid. He now says what? We were afraid. And this led to a lot of discussion, because this can't be Allah. This part of the ayah cannot be Allah. Why not? Because you cannot attribute khashya, fear, to Allah. I say, for example, don't go driving in the rain, I'm afraid you'll get in a car accident. When I say that, I don't know that. It might happen, it might not happen, right? But my concern is being expressed by what word? I'm afraid. I'm afraid if you go, there's going to be a problem. So the word fear is suitable for Allah's creation, but is absolutely not attributable to Allah Azza wa Jal. Now the wording is, Khadir, who's acting according to Allah, is saying, we were afraid. We were afraid. So how do we process that? This is going to be a little hard to explain, but I think I got it. We had a long discussion with Sheikh Suhaib Saeed today about this, and some of the Tafseer Muqaran on this subject. I think it's really powerful. You see, Khadir alayhi salam is also a creature of Allah who has feelings. He's not a robot. You know, we think of those who obey Allah as someone that just obey and they don't have any emotions of their own, right? Now what happens is when someone has a deep bond with Allah, then they start loving what Allah loves. And they start hating what Allah hates. When your bond with Allah and His word isn't that deep, then you'll say, yeah, I'm doing it because you're supposed to do it in Islam. I don't get it, but I'm doing it anyway. Or it's haram, I know it's haram, so I won't do it. I really want to though. In other words, your emotions are pro, even though the word of Allah is against. And you're fighting your emotions. But there's a level of connection a slave can develop with Allah. And by the way, that's actually a powerful thing too. If your emotions want you to do something haram, and you're fighting your emotions and doing the halal anyway, or if your emotions are telling you to not obey a commandment of Allah, fulfill a requirement, and you fulfill those requirements even though your emotions are not there with it, this is actually a remarkable thing. You don't feel like getting up for Fajr and you got up anyway. You didn't enjoy the Fajr prayer and you prayed it anyway. That's also a remarkable thing. But you know what? Someone can develop in their relationship with Allah where Allah, matures their heart, not just their mind. He matures their heart. So they start feeling, their feelings start changing. And their feelings become what? What Allah has commanded feels good. What Allah forbade also feels bad. I have emotionally endorsed obedience to Allah. I've emotionally endorsed it. Now in the world of Khadir alayhi salam, he's been given some instructions. And he's been told this child is going to grow up to be something bad. And even if philosophically you might have a problem with it, he's got a kind of relationship with Allah's instructions now that he feels those concerns even as a creature of Allah. And his feelings are coming out in what word? فَخَشِينَا. We were afraid. And that khashina can also be an indication towards abdan min ibadina, one of our slaves. There may be a group of angels or creatures that are along with Khadir that discuss this thing. And they all have similar concern. They've developed this concern for what Allah shows them. Allah shows that this child is going to be something bad, and now they're afraid of the evil that's going to come out of... Right now he's innocent, but what's coming in a few years, they know. They know. And they're afraid of it. Allah isn't afraid of it. Allah is alim of it. But they're khashin of it. They're afraid of it. So it's kind of like, if I was to give you an analogy to make this a little bit easier, I gave you the analogy of people who talk on the phone and whatever, customer service. Let me give you another customer service example. There are people who hate their job, like at the post office, right? So there are people who hate their job. And then there are people, or bus drivers in New York City, hate their job, right? But you have people that work at a company, work at the government, work at some organization, and they love their job, and they love their company. They're like cheerleaders for their company. And you know what? When they're talking to a customer who's having a hard time, you're like, yeah, they don't just say, that's our policy. Say, I'm so sorry to hear that, sir. I'm going to do everything I can to help you. And there's this enthusiasm. You're like, wow, are you like, is the owner your uncle or something? Like, you're really invested into this thing. You're really into it, right? And sometimes you get people like that take a sense of ownership in what they're doing, right? That's the kind of thing I'm telling you. Khadir alayhi salam isn't just obeying what Allah says. He's taking a sense of emotional investment into what Allah has commanded him to do. So he's also concerned about the things Allah has taught him, and he's made those concerns his own. And that's why the word khashina is really beautiful here, actually. And what we might learn from that is something we should hope to get in our hearts. I can't tell you how to feel. You can't make me feel something. You can't make me love something or hate something. Those are emotions that cannot be engineered. They're natural. But you know what? Allah can inspire feelings. That's why we make a dua. The residence of our feelings is our heart. One of the prophetic prayers is, Ya muqallib al-qulub, thabbit qalbi ala dinik. The changer of hearts, make my heart firm on your deen. And part of the meaning of that dua is, make my heart love what you love. Make my heart hate what you hate. And that's why my heart will be firm on your religion. So mature my feelings, evolve my feelings to be more in line with your words. Right? So fakhashina. Now let's get to the richest part of these ayat. An yurhiqahuma tughyanan wa kufran. Rahaq in Arabic, tarhaquha qatara. For example, fazaduhum rahaq. Only 5 minutes? Oh my God. What am I gonna do? What am I gonna do? Okay, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna speak 2x. I'm gonna put playback speed. So I'll have to leave it halfway, I guess. But anyway, so the word rahaq in Arabic actually means when a lion catches up to its prey and crushes it under its paws, right, snatches it up, that's actually called rahaqa. And they say, rahaq al-kilab al-sayd. The hunting dogs, when they running after the rabbit or whatever, they catch up to it and they pounce on it, and it's now crushed under their weight, right? And it's pinned down under them. That's actually called rahaq. So it's got two things in it. It's someone aggressive, someone domineering, overpowering, that has got you pinned down. That's actually the term rahaq. You're buried under somebody else's, pin. And this is the word that he uses and says, this child, we were afraid, meaning Allah told me already, and it scared me, what Allah told me, that he was going to pin his parents like the animal pins its prey. He was going to bury his parents and crush his parents with, the animal pins the hunter pins the animal with its claws, right? What are the claws that this child was going to use when he grew up? The claws were going to be tughyanan wa kufran. Tughyan means tajawuzul had, going beyond limits. This child was going to commit all kinds of crimes against his parents. And he was going to crush them with verbal abuse, physical abuse. He was going to crush them with insults. He was going to crush them by taking their money, making them a prisoner in their own home. He was going to crush them by beating them, by humiliating them, by insulting them. He was going to crush them by destroying their life savings. He was going to crush them in every possible way. That's the tughyan. That's not even the kufr part. That's just the tughyan part. And above all of that, he was going to crush them. Kufr means two things, disbelief and kufran, actually. Kufr has that duality in meaning, izdiwaj al-ma'na. So one, he was going to crush his parents because his parents are believers, and he was going to show them what a disbeliever he is. And he will be so open about his disbelief and so defiant that every time they see him, they will feel crushed. Not just by his abuse, but by his defiant kufr of Allah. And he was going to crush them with his incredible ingratitude. This is going to be a son that is going to spit at every favor that anyone's ever done for him, especially his parents. Allah is telling us a really scary reality. Children are a blessing, but sometimes they're a preview of hell. And these parents didn't do anything. They were believers. And they were going to get this nightmare child that was going to absolutely wreck their lives with tughyan and kufr. And there's another set of meanings of this that I'm going to fast forward. And what are those other meanings? That they were going to love him no matter what. Because parents love their children sometimes, no matter what. Other parents eventually say, you know what, dafa ho jao. But some parents love their children no matter what. And these are those kinds of parents, right? And you know what he was going to do? Because he knows they love him so much, he was going to become an abuser, a criminal, lie, cheat, steal, murder, whatever. And who's covering up for him? The parents are covering up for him. So he's crushed them And the tughyan that he does is actually now also attributed to them. He's crushed their iman. Their iman is now going away because they love their child so much that they're lying for him. They're giving false testimony for him. They're saying the police comes at the door and say, no, he hasn't been here for 2 years and he's hiding in the basement. You know, they're going to cover for him, tughyanan. And they're going to hide his, and they're going to end up doing things that are absolutely a kufr in the iman of Allah. They're going to lose their iman out of the love of their disgusting child. You know, their horrible child. That's what they're going to end up doing. So not only is he the embodiment of tughyan and kufr, they who started off as believers, their biggest trial and failure will be this rebellious child. They'll end up losing their faith. By the way, I know my time's up, but this is a comment from Allah about how children can be a horrible trial, and one of the worst things a child can do to a parent isn't even that they abuse the parent or are ungrateful to the parent, but when out of love for your child, you start crossing Allah's limits. When out of love for covering for your child, like for some families, you know what they do? They know their son is an alcoholic. They know their son has a drug problem. They know their son has a violence problem. They know their son has, domestic abuse issues and all of it. And then they're trying to find some nice girl for him because she's going to fix him. And you know what they tell? MashaAllah, he's a hafiz. He leads tarawih. He does, and they cover up all of it. And this is because she's going to be his rehab program. No, she's going to be his punching bag. She's going to be his, she's just going to take the beatings for him. And you ruin some other family's life out of what? Tughyan, yurhiqahuma tughyanan wa kufra. That's what this is too. This is what this is too. And what did Allah do in His wisdom? He showed those parents a mercy. That they would have loved this child no matter what. That's why they're going to be traumatized for life that they lost a child. But that trauma is nothing compared to the trauma they were going to create for themselves in this life and in the next life. So Allah decided that this child should not survive. He also decided that this child, because he was zakiyya, he was pure. And Musa alayhi salam was right. A child is pure. And when that child died, you know what? Where did that child go? He's actually going to Jannah. He didn't commit a crime yet. He didn't commit any crime. Allah saved that child from himself. Allah saved those parents from themselves, what they were going to do to themselves because of this child. Allah saved them from torment that was going to come their way in this life. Some of us even said he was going to commit crimes and then pin it on their parents, on his parents. They did it. It's in their house. The dead body's in their basement. My mom killed him. He was going to make their lives miserable in other ways. And so knowing all of that, this happened. أَنْ يُرْهِقَهُمَا طُغْيَانًا وَكُفْرًا. But this is not the only thing that happened. And there's obviously, I opened up a can of worms, but I didn't get to close it because there's a shortage of time. Inshallah, just to inform you guys, I started durus of Surah Al-Kahf maybe 4 years ago. And they're now, I've committed to finishing them, inshallah ta'ala, before the end of the year. I should be completed with this series. Those of you who would like to follow along the entire series, I'm putting all of this series up on Bayyinah TV. So I know some of these recordings came up on Facebook and social media. Every once in a while I might do that. But the complete series is on bayyinahtv.com. It's under something called Deeper Look. So I mentioned before, I've completed 48 surahs under the Deeper Look study. And this will be surah number 49, inshallah ta'ala, that I'll complete. Make dua that I'm able to complete all of it, inshallah. So if you'd like to follow along for the subsequent lectures, because the next lecture I'm giving tomorrow is actually in Queens, and then 2 nights in different masjids in Queens, and then I'm heading off to Long Island after that. So I'm just going to be making different stops, but it's the same series. So if you'd like to continue along with me, that would be your way of doing so, inshallah ta'ala. I'd like to conclude also by thanking the administration of ICC. IC3, is that what you guys call it? IC3? Because there's 3 C's, is that why? ICCC. Okay, so ICCC. I'd like to thank them for their wonderful hospitality. We really enjoyed ourselves, and really, alhamdulillah, appreciated the courtesy and the great conversations that I had a chance to have here. For sure, inshallah, if I ever make my way back to the East Coast for any reason, I'll make this a pit stop, announced or unannounced. I'll just show up here, inshallah. So once again, very grateful. If Allah doesn't give us a chance to meet here, I pray we meet in a much better place. Barakallahu li wa lakum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Right now, we're going to open up the floor to
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So about 10, 15 more minutes, inshallah.
Okay.
So there's a couple questions from yesterday from the sister side that we would like to address first. Okay. So the first question from the sister side: in today's so-called social media world, and where virtual reality is at the tip of our fingers, especially last year with COVID, how do we take our kids back to normal, real life, and have an attachment with the religion and Quran?
So I'll repeat the question because I'm broadcasting live also, just so other people can benefit from your questions too. So in this new environment, especially with the social isolation that was caused by COVID, how do we facilitate an attachment to the religion for our children? It's a pretty loaded question. I'd start simple though. I think that kids just need to be, we need to have a good balance between talking to them and listening to them, right? So, and this balance is actually something Quran inspired. The Fatiha, Allah is talking, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim Maliki Yawmiddin, and then we're talking, Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'een, Ihdina as-siratal mustaqim. It's actually a conversation. And we call Allah innaka sami'ud du'a. Allah, one of Allah's sunan is that He listens, right? So a lot of times we want to have halaqat for our children, and we want to tell them this, that, or the other, or teach them the stories of the prophets, and all of those things are great. But a lot of times we just don't even know what's going on in our kids' heads. We don't even know where they're at in their head. We don't even know do you even know what games they're playing? What friends they have? What conversations they're having? What they're into? We don't, and they're not going to tell you, because if you ask them, so what you doing? Nothing. So what do you like to play? Games. Which ones? I don't know. They know, but they don't want to tell you because you're boring. Right? So we have to learn to facilitate meaningful conversations with our kids. And one of the best ways we can do that is actually activities with our kids. As a parent, one of the things that you can really do to enhance your relationship with your children so they open up to you is to not give them stuff and give them more devices, or get them something else, a game or something where they're glued to the screen again. Yeah, they can play games, that's fine. But you need to do some kind of activity. Either you're doing an oil change together, or you're changing tires, or you're going out fishing, or you're going for a walk. Something where they're disconnected from the internet. And they're forced to have a real conversation with you. And you should learn, you should even look this up. How do you ask prompt questions? They're called prompt questions of children. How do you get children to open up? You learn to ask them prompt questions. Not just yes or no questions or one word answer questions. How was your day? Good. How's school? Good. Are you feeling okay? Yes. Are you hungry? No. Yes. No. Yeah. I don't know. Ice cream? One word answers. Well, that's because you're asking the wrong kinds of questions. Hey, so what do you think about the Isha prayer? Was that too long? Did you think it was too long? Did you get tired? You looked a little tired. Were you tired? Yeah. Oh, see, there's a conversation. He said, yeah. And you could ask what's the scariest thing that ever happened to you last year? And then you as a dad or mom could say, the scariest thing that ever happened to me when I was your age, and you could tell them that story. You've taken an interest in something that's happening in their life, and you're learning to ask these questions that are getting them to open up. And you'd be surprised how many opportunities to bring up and to inspire them with something that you learned from your Prophet or from the Quran will come up in the middle of those conversations. And those kinds of conversations are not a lecture. They're not a dars. They didn't sit down in a halaqah. They were just walking around in the park or shooting some ball or something, right? And those are the things that leave a lasting impression on a child's personality. Because your goal and my goal in education is actually to leave an imprint. What do you remember from the halaqat you sat in? Nothing. You know what you remember? My dad, one time we were driving, you know what he said to me? Why do you remember that? Because you were driving. It was an exclusive moment between you and your dad. And then he dropped something on you and you remembered it forever. Right? Look back at the thousands of hours you've spent with your father as a child or your mother as a child, and how many quotes do you actually remember? A handful. And you'll notice that those handful of quotes or memories are because they were memorable moments. So you know what? Our job should actually be to facilitate memorable moments. That should be part of our prerogative. And then inshallah, these opportunities to share something of benefit that will actually be internalized by kids will happen.
Jazakallah khair. For the next question, there is a sister who has reverted back to Islam. And so her question to actually Sheikh Ibrahim was, she obviously would like to see her parents inshallah when they become Muslim as well. And so in seeking this advice, she went to a sheikh who basically told her that don't make dua for non-Muslims. And so she's in the crowd tonight, yeah. But it's real, right? So obviously, if you can shed some light on that, I know you'll be...
Okay, so the question was, the sister accepted Islam. She'd like to see her parents become Muslim one day. May Allah guide them to Islam. She went and asked someone, and they basically told her, don't make dua for non-Muslims. That's what they told her. How utterly ridiculous. I wouldn't even say with all due respect, because I have no respect for that answer. Did Umar bin Khattab and Abu Jahl, were they not prayed for by Rasulullah ﷺ for their guidance? What religion are you following? How can you give such cruel advice to someone? We love our parents. Doesn't matter if they're Christian, Muslim, atheist, Jew, agnostic. It doesn't matter what they are. They're our parents. And we want the best for them in this life and in the next. And wishing the best for them and praying for them is actually completely not only acceptable, it's something you should do. That would make you a normal person. This makes you a normal person. Ibrahim alayhi salam made dua when he built the Kaaba. Mathabatan, he says, فَاجْعَلْ أَفْئِدَةً مِّنَ النَّاسِ تَهْوِي إِلَيْهِمْ. But incline people's hearts towards them. Was he concerned about believers or all of humanity? All of humanity. And we call ourselves the religion of our father Ibrahim. We call ourselves that. When Lut alayhi salam, the angels came to destroy the nation of Lut, where did they stop first? They stopped with Ibrahim alayhi salam, right? And when he heard that this nation is going to be destroyed, I swear if we knew that the nation of Lut is about to be destroyed and somebody gave us a memo ahead of time, we're like, Alhamdulillah, finally these kuffar are going to get it. Can I watch? And what did Ibrahim alayhi salam say? Yujadiluna fi qawmi Lut. He argued with the angels, fought back. Is there some way they can be saved? He's concerned about them. This is something the ummah was given as a gift. Kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat linnas, not minan nas. You're the best people that were extracted for the service of humanity, not from humanity. We're not the best of people, we're the best for people. How can you be the best for people? You don't wish for them to have guidance. You don't mean well for them. Nuh alayhi salam, how many centuries? And what does he say? Ya qawmi, ya my people, my people, my people. He's inviting them. He wants good for them. So your parents, absolutely you should pray for them. And if somebody's going to cite Ibrahim alayhi salam's the exchange where Allah Azza wa Jal told him not to make dua for his father anymore, he didn't say that from the beginning. Remember when he was leaving the house, what did he say? سَوْفَ أَسْتَغْفِرُ لَكُمْ رَبِّي. I will make istighfar for you. And at that moment Allah did not stop him. It is actually in the surah that discusses bara'ah, where it's known, Allah has revealed a verdict that this person will not change. Now I forbid you. Have you received a revelation that your father or mother will not change? So it's haram for you to make dua for them? Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. You should be making dua for them. You should be the best of them. And the best of your da'wah to them will be you're a better daughter than you ever were in your entire life. You're more patient with them, you're more kind to them, you respond with wisdom than you ever did before. That's and at the same time you maintain your du'as for them. You don't think Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam made dua for Abu Talib? You don't think he did that? You don't think he made dua for his own people? And you would think there's haram for you to make dua for non-Muslims? How absolutely absurd. I hope someone who gave that answer is offended.
Jazakallah khair. And there's one question that came in from the guy's side. The question is, since more than 1/3 of the Quran speaks to the people of the book, i.e. Christians or the Jews, what advice would you give in those who are interested in making da'wah to these two groups and other non-Abrahamic faiths?
Okay, so as far as, so 1/3 of the Quran speaks to the people of the book, I would add some qualifications. Like for example, I'll tell you something about Ali Imran that's not very well known. Allah says, Ya Ahlul Kitab, Ya Ahlul Kitab, Ya Ahlul Kitab, right? So people of, we translate that as what? People of the book. Ahl actually is short for mu'ahal, qualified. Qualified. And the context of those ayat is they were actual Christian, ordained priests, ministers, deacons, people that have spent time in the church and have studied the Bible and have spent their lives as monks, etc. They came to discuss with the Rasul ﷺ, and he's having an exchange with them. Now you having a conversation with a Presbyterian minister is different than you having a conversation with your Christian taxi driver or your regular old, neighbor that happens to be Catholic or happens to be Protestant or whatever else, who doesn't know much about his own religion either, right? A lot of the dialogue in the Quran is not happening with the average Christian or average Jew. It's actually happening with the rabbis, the priests, the ministers, which is one of the miracles of the Quran. The Quran, usually when people want to proselytize other people's religions, they go for the least knowledgeable people and try to convert them to their religion. Quran went after the most knowledgeable of the people of the book. Went after the most knowledgeable and said, Hatu burhanakum. Hatu burhanakum. Bring your evidences. Fa'tu bit tawrati fatluha. Bring the Tawrat and read it. Right? Sahaba would walk into Jewish study seminaries in Medina and say, Fa'tu bit tawrati fatluha. They would do that. Like in the seminaries, they would do that. Why? Because and so what happens a lot of times is the dialogue in the Quran gets confused with the conversation we should be having with the average Christian. No, those are for the knowledgeable Christians, because sometimes it's antagonistic. And yeah, it will be antagonistic, because when someone knows the truth and they're hiding it, then Allah will be angry with them. And you can't just use those ayat and talk to some guy who doesn't know anything and say, yeah, you hide the book? You hide the truth? I'm like, oh, no bro, I just trying to get a burger. I just came back from church, we had a barbecue, I don't know what you're talking about. So you're getting but the Quran says you people. No, the Quran doesn't say that. You think the Quran says that. So chill out a little bit. The da'wah does not mean, and by the way, the other thing that often happens is I want to make da'wah to Christians, so I want to open up the Bible and I want to show them all the contradictions in the Bible. Please stop doing that. The sunnah of which prophet is this? The sunnah of which prophet is this? That you go to people of a faith and you show them how absurd their faith is, or how contradictory their faith. You wouldn't like it. You wouldn't like it. If they came to you with the Quran and said, look, the Quran says this. First of all, you and I, most of us aren't even that educated in the Quran anyway. So if they start quoting stuff, we're like, I'm going to ask my imam, I'll get back to you. So don't do something you're not ready for. And it's not courteous anyway. This is not the way they were invited. When you know what Allah describes how they were invited? When they hear what Allah has revealed in the Quran, تَرَى أَعْيُنَهُمْ تَفِيضُ مِنَ الدَّمْعِ. You will see their eyes start rolling with tears. The good they have in the Bible, because it still has nur in it, فِيهِ هُدًى وَنُور. The good they have in it, they see the perfection of it when you speak sincerely about your own faith, about your own book, about what Allah says. When they hear about Maryam, I'm witness to this. When you just translate the ayat of Surah Maryam to a Christian crowd, many of the men, women sitting there, older men that have spent their lives going to church, never missed a Sunday, sitting there crying their hearts out. Not thinking, these Muslims, they're not doing that. They're sitting crying their eyes out. Not a Muslim shed a tear when they heard those ayat, and those Christians are sitting there crying. That's the reality of those people. So, we have to show courtesy, respect. And we have to introduce them to something that is common ground. We have to introduce them. We have to reintroduce them to Mary. We have to reintroduce them to Abraham. You guys believe in Abraham too, yeah? Well, ours is pretty different. Let me show you something about our Ibrahim alayhi salam. Don't tell them your version of Abraham is wrong. We got the real deal. Just show them something. And you know what? I've done this. And I've tried it. And you know what's happened? Like rabbis of many years of study behind them are sitting there crying when I'm just doing a dars on one ayah about Ibrahim alayhi salam. Why is this guy crying listening to a Gentile Muslim? An Ishmaelite. Right? Why is he listening and why is he crying? Because he heard something about his father that touched his heart. Because the Quran does that. It hits the hearts. مَوْعِظَةٌ مِّن رَبِّكُمْ. So we just have to know our book and be able to speak about our book from the heart and intelligently. That's all we got to do. Inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. Now there's a question from the sister side.
Yes, so there's a question from one of the sisters over here. Can you please explain the word rahaka? May Allah bless you.
Yeah, I can explain the word rahaq. As I was telling you, the etymology of rahaq has to do with when, so they use the word rahaq for dogs that are trained for hunting and they catch an animal. So rahaq al-kilab as-sayda, that's how they use it. So when the dogs catch the prey and they pounce on it and it's crushed under its paws and it can't move, right? It's completely surrendered under the oppression of the hunting dog. That scene is rahaq. And so this was the word used for the child in Surah Al-Kahf who was going to grow up and he was going to crush his parents under the claws of his abuse. طُغْيَانًا وَكُفْرًا. And so this is actually a very visual image. It's actually describing that they become victims. Just like the hunted animal is the victim, they're the prey. So he was going to be a victim of his parents. So just like we talk about, in modern society we talk about parental abuse, parents abusing children. There's actually also children abusing parents, especially parents of old age. And that's being commented on here, right? With that word. So I hope that helps a little bit. Inshallah.
Okay.
Just include the parents for the community members will also be under the boys.
I couldn't hear your question.
You will just include the parents and victims or the community members as well.
So yeah, in the ayah is Allah saying that the victims were just going to be the parents of this young man, or were there going to be others too? Actually, because of the masdar usage, I won't get technical with you, the ripple effect of the evil was much larger. It was actually much, much larger. And the parents were the immediate they were in the immediate blast radius of the evil that was going to come out of this person. Yeah.
Okay, so one final question for the night. What is the best advice for our young children on how to respond to other kids when they are criticized about being Muslim or they're being made fun of because of their Muslim name?
So kids, a couple of things. So let me repeat the question so my audience online hears it too. What is advice for children who get bullied at school, made fun of because they're Muslim, criticized because they're Muslim, or get tormented with verbal abuse because they have a Muslim name? What should they do? First of all, children have a right to be protected. Children, I'll repeat myself, all children have a right to be protected. And that includes Muslim, non-Muslim, all children. So when children are being insulted, humiliated, when children are being bullied, even at the hands of other children, then parents have to become extremely proactive and extremely annoying with their public. You're tax-paying citizens. You're paying. Those children are asking me for guidance on what to do. They have you, and you're supposed to go fight their fight in these schools. So no one gets to say a word to them about being Muslim, just like no one gets to say to anything to any child that's African American or Jewish or Hispanic or whatever. And if they do, there's going to be hell to pay. And you know what? You have to raise your voices. You have to get aggressive. And you have to call, and you know what? And sometimes in our country, the only language larger institutions understand is dollar bills, so file lawsuits for the emotional trauma caused to your child. File lawsuits. Who's stopping you? Who's stopping you? And your children deserve. You pay taxes too. You pay for these school districts too. You have rights like every other child. I send my child to a school, you send your child to a school so they can feel safe in that environment and they can get a good education. They do not go there and they have to tolerate any kinds of abuses or insults. And for the kids that are facing that, first of all, it really hurts me that you're facing that. Second of all, immediately tell your parents, immediately tell your teachers. And also, don't just tell your teachers, email your teachers. Have written record that you reported it. So when they don't act on it, they have to explain that to a judge. Don't just say it, because when you say it, it's not on record, right? So kids, whenever something happens, I want you to write it out and email it and include your parents. So all of this is on record. Because that record that might be the reason. They might not even want to do something, but they're afraid of a lawsuit and they'll do something. Right? So learn to be smart about it. And when it comes to somebody else making fun of your name or insulting you, first of all, learn to ignore people. My father told me this advice a long time ago. When you're walking down the street and a dog is barking, you don't have to get offended and bark back. You keep going. You don't say, ruff, ruff. Oh yeah? Ruff, ruff, ruff. You don't do that. Just keep going. Learn to ignore people that are ignorant. Because you know what they want? They want to see a reaction from you. They want to see you scared. They want to see you offended because they get a kick out of it. You know those kinds of people? Those kids, unfortunately, they don't feel any sense of value in themselves. There's nothing good on their minds. The only time they feel good about themselves is when they make someone else feel lower. You know, you could be a better person by doing something good. So you can get higher. But if you're not able to do something good, you just make someone else feel lower and you feel automatically high. Even though you never moved an inch. You know? So you should feel sorry for people that do think like that. You should feel sorry for them. Allah has given you much stronger ambition, much stronger purpose, much stronger personalities. Don't you ever be ashamed of being Muslim. Don't you ever feel ashamed. You should feel sorry for, and even sad for those who don't have the guidance of Allah yet. And you're gifted that you have it. Yes?
Can you please say the concept of trolling you're explaining?
Yeah.
So we need to understand what is troll means. How can you feed the troll, or how can you defeat the troll?
Right. So my brother actually added the comment, this is all has to do with trolling. We have to understand what a troll is and what they need, right? And how do you feed a troll and how do you defeat a troll? You know what the troll feeds on? Response. Attention. That's all they feed on. Don't give them that and they burn. It hurts them. Your lack of response hurts them a lot. And they'll try to get more offensive and more offensive and more offensive only in hopes that you will finally what? Give a response. And in doing so, they're only humiliating themselves and exposing themselves for who they are. That's all they're doing. So you don't have to get involved. And don't get tangled up. Even the adults, don't get tangled up in social media trolling. Don't get tangled because somebody said something, you're like, oh yeah? Well, you people, da 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 da. Or how dare you? Stop. You didn't fix anything. You didn't solve the problem of the ummah with the social media, comment fest. فَلْيَقُلْ خَيْرًا أَوْ لِيَصْمُتْ. A believer should say something good or remain silent. Whatever happened to that? Okay.
Jazakallah khair. We have a couple more questions from the sister side.
I know you said last question. You said a couple more questions from the sister side. It's cool. No, it's okay. Yeah, 5 minutes. That was 15 minutes ago. It's okay. No, I'm not saying. I'm good. Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
So, my question is regarding marriage, and I know that.
Okay, assalamu alaikum everyone. Okay.
We're all taught that marriage is sunnah, it's half your deen, and all of that stuff. And a lot of us grew up without a lot of instruction on what are the requirements incumbent on us to get ready to prepare to be a spouse. And so you see a lot of young people today who graduate college, get a job, next step is to get married. And there's not, other than, be able to support your wife and be of age, a lot of us don't know what we need to do to be actually ready to be a spouse. And so I'm wondering, being-wise, with regard to being, are there things that internally or externally that we need to have in place before we sign up for shadi.com or whatever?
Okay, so your question, I'm going to have a hard time repeating this one. It's about marriage. This question is about marriage and how can young people prepare themselves for married life, right? I'll just speak to the men today. I won't speak to the women about that. How can you guys prepare yourselves? Our parents were supposed to prepare us for what it means to be, your father is supposed to prepare you for what it means to be a man, what it means to stand up on your own feet, what it means to show dignity and character, what it means to protect your family, what it means to speak to your mother with respect, to treat your daughters and your sisters a certain way, to be a protector of a household. You're supposed to pick these things up not from a course or a seminar. You're supposed to pick these things up because you're watching your dad live his life. And you pick that integrity up from him. So, you as a father are supposed to inculcate these values into your child just by the way you carry yourself and what you expect of your son. The other thing that's supposed to happen is our young men are supposed to not ride off of the income of their parents. They're supposed to become financially independent as early as possible. I even say high school. Get a job. Go work. Go work through college. And you know what's happened now because of immigrant society. We came from hard economies. Many people came to America, Australia, England, wherever. They settled. Now they have a better life, right? Because they drove the taxis. They worked in the grocery stores. They did all that stuff, worked in warehouses. And now they saved up and they put their kids through college. And their kids don't have any respect for the kind of hard work their parents did. And in fact, their kids don't even know what hard work means. So they're 3 years in college. I don't know what my major is. I was thinking like political science, but I don't know, computer science or science. What is science really? You were a man, Sharia-wise, you were a man when you hit puberty, and you're acting like a giant baby when you're 25 years old. And so how are you ready for marriage? How is that being ready for marriage? So being in the real world, developing a work ethic, actually appreciating the value of supporting a family, that should be happening well before you get married, so you're ready for it. You have a sense of maturity in you for it. You don't have short temper. You don't lose your ego doesn't get inflamed every 3 seconds, because you know what it means. You know what it means to get yelled at by your boss because you came late, and you take it like a man. And you know what it means to have to make a budget. You know these things. You don't just, you got a good grade in school and your dad bought you a BMW, and then they're paying for your college tuition, and you're going out on mama's credit card. And how are you a man? Other than physically being the size of a man, you're the same as when you were 4 years old with an iPad sitting on the potty training, and there's just a man version of a baby. So you man up. I would tell the guys, man up. If you really want to get married, then you learn to take responsibility. Now, there's the psychological component, the emotional, intelligence component, these other components that come with being a responsible husband. Some of your dads are, great husbands to your moms, but they didn't take courses on how to be a good husband. They were just raised right. They were raised and they learned these values, right? They learned certain mannerisms. So pick those up. And if you don't have them, at least recognize in yourself that I don't have them. I need to get them. And when you develop that, then inshallah you're ready for a family. You're ready to take care of a family. As far as, it's a loaded question, right? Being prepared for marriage and what marriage entails. And Allah has lots of guidance on it, and in terms of the goals and purpose of marriage. In fact, it's interesting you brought this up. The Quran didn't really talk about how to have a successful marriage. Not really. There's no, this is a surah about good marriage. You know why? Just, I would say the same reason the Quran doesn't have any surahs on how to do an oil change, or any surahs on how to change a diaper, or how to calm down a baby. You know why? Some things Allah created the human beings smart enough to figure out themselves. You understand? They didn't have to be revealed. So what did Allah do? In Surah Al-Rum, He just dropped one ayah about the entire philosophy of Quranic wisdom on marriage. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُم مَّوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. Done. One ayah about marriage and its goals. One place. Some subtle hints in the ayat of Ramadan. And you know what? It has enough wisdom for you to know all the things you wouldn't have known in psychology, or you wouldn't have learned in social life. You will learn in that one ayah. That ayah's purpose is not just to go on your shadi card or to get recited at your walima ceremony. That ayah is worthy of pondering because it has the Quran's prescription for what it means to be married. So my intention, inshallah, over the next couple of months is to write a small booklet on what we can learn from that ayah. Because if Allah only talked about it this one time in a comprehensive way, it must have a lot to offer, right? So I wanted to do something like that so that inshallah ta'ala it can be of benefit from at least from the Quranic perspective. Thanks for your question.
Sheikh Ibrahim, final question.
This is one.
Okay, so I am in the Muslim Center in Flushing, New York tomorrow night, inshallah. And I am in Masjid, I believe it's called Masjid al-Rahman in Richmond Hills in New York on Friday. I'm giving khutbah there, and the dars, the same dars continued. And then on Saturday, I'm going to be in Masjid Darul Quran in Bayshore in Long Island, inshallah. And finally, I'm probably going to end up in Masjid Taqwa with Imam Siraj Wahaj on Sunday. And then on Monday, I'm out of here, inshallah. Inshallah. That's, yeah, inshallah. Next time I come back, I'll be sure to make a stop here. Really, thank you all for your wonderful hospitality and some great conversations. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Jazakumullah khairan, Ustadh.